We're going to talk about tenants today. I'm very excited about tenants.
Tenants.
I have tenants myself.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's a question.
Not tenancy of, you know, or never mind. I won't get into.
Don't get into that.
Okay.
The one question that I've had asked, especially a lot this last week,
Mm-hmm.
actually, and this is geared towards buyer's agents out there. If you're writing an offer on a short sale listing that is currently tenant occupied, there's some things that you need to know, and there's some pitfalls out there that you need to be aware of in how that transaction can progress. Because just because a home is sold, it doesn't terminate the lease automatically. So that new buyer could end up with tenants unless all of that is clearly spelled out and they're very they have an understanding of what they're actually getting into.
Correct. So well, let's back up just a second. The investor buying the property, let's say, or the individual buying the property, if it's going to be owner occupied or if it's going to be an investor that's going to, you know, to keep the property as an investment, you have got to work with an agent that understands the purchase agreement. And I know that sounds kind of condescending and elementary, but it's true. You have to fill out the purchase agreement properly.
And in many cases, it's not a question so much of it being filled out properly. It's you may have someone that hasn't encountered the situation a lot and they're not exactly sure what to do. And if you're a listing agent in that position and you're listing a second home or an investment property for somebody and it does have tenants in it, just understand there's some special provisions that you need to look at. There's some steps that you need to take to make sure everyone's protected.
Yeah, and the first thing is to ask if there's tenants in the property.
That helps.
Yeah, because we've gotten a lot of we've had a lot of contact from agents that say, oh, I just wrote this offer and it's for a owner occupied, and we found out later on as we opened escrow that it's a tenant living in the property. Ask the question up front.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now one of the main things on that is if you're listing the property and it's tenant occupied, there's a couple of different things that you're going to need to look at. First and foremost, you should make the tenant aware that you want to sell the property and see if they're going to willingly participate in the sale. And there's several ways that can be done. You can either offer to, give them a month's free rent, since you're most likely not making the mortgage payment on that house anyway.
Right.
You can agree to possibly refund the security deposit early. Any of those items along there to see if they will participate in the sale, to make sure it is the responsibility of the seller to make sure that that property is vacant at the time of close of escrow per the purchase agreement if the new buyer intends to occupy it.
Correct, yeah. So communication between the landlord, property management, the tenant, or however that little circle is made up per property is vital. I mean, they have to communicate. Number one, if a listing agent lists a short sale or lists any property and doesn't tell the tenant, they're in a world of hurt already.
Right. Because
they've got to give the tenant proper notice to show the property. Now, number two, if they're listing the property and the tenant's unaware and then all of a sudden they sell it without it even being in the MLS, because that happens,
yep.
As long as the new buyer is going to honor the lease, we don't have a problem. I mean, that happens in apartment and commercial stuff all the time. But when we're talking single-family residences, we've got to have extremely open communication. You want a tenant that's going to cooperate with you.
Yeah, exactly. And the main thing is, again, from a buyer's perspective, if the clients that you're representing intend to live in the property, then everything to do with those tenants in that lease needs to be sorted out up front. Do not go all the way through, get short sale approval, and suddenly go, well, wait a minute, what are we going to do with the tenants that are in this property? Because that may be a problem for evictions that your new buyers have, and they're not going to be too happy with you on that. Second is if it's an investor that's buying the property, he may want those tenants to stay in which case you're going to want to use the proper addendums for whichever state that you're in, and make sure that the copies of the lease, the cash flow on that property is presented, all those financials, payment history, everything's turned over, so that the investor buyer of that property can make a determination on, I might just want to keep those tenants in. It's perfect. I'm buying it as an investment. Based on the rent that they've got, this is going to work out great for me. If they've been good tenants, I may just choose to keep them in there.
Right, and the other side of that, if it's going to be owner-occupied, if you're not representing on the buyer side, you're not representing an investor who's going to be owner-occupied, then you have to follow the proper procedure in the purchase agreement to state that it is going to be owner-occupied and you would like that tenant to be vacated 5 days prior to close of escrow, because you want to do your walkthrough and see if there's any damages or there's any problem with the property.
Exactly.
So the onus is on the agent, on both agents, the buyer's agent and the listing agent, to make sure that there's communication. And Unfortunately, if you're in a short sale situation, and the investor that's selling the property is selling short and there's a lease in place, there are forms right now, there are CAR forms that that have a MARS base to them that basically put that tenant on notice. So if you have questions about these forms, feel free to put some feedback on Facebook or shoot us an email. This video would be an hour and a half long if we went through the whole thing.
Yeah, if we went into all of it. You know, this topic, like many of the others, comes down to information. So if you're representing the buyer, if the property is occupied, who's occupying it first and foremost? If it's a tenant in there, ask the seller of the property if they have any plans for that seller to vacate. Just do your research up front. Don't get too excited that you've got somebody that suddenly wants to write an offer. Make sure that you do your homework, ask the right questions, and you'll avoid the problems.
Yeah, the more homework you do up front, the smoother it's going to be at the end. And I'm sure that you can attest to this too in all your years of experience, is that if there's a lot of work done up front, escrow is usually pretty smooth.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've found that in a lot of cases that if it's bumpy in the beginning up front, it's smooth at the end. But if there's really smooth in the beginning, more times than not, there's some hurdles that come up at the end that could make or break the deal. So do your due diligence up front.
Do your due diligence, ask your questions, and if you've got any specific situations you'd like some help with or you want to ask a question, again, s2neg.com. You can post a question. You can always send us an email as well. Facebook, whatever you want to do, and we'll be happy to answer that for you. Until next time.
Thanks for stopping by.